This concludes the savings part of our webinar, and I now want to move on to part 5, where we'll discuss how the independent third-party review component will work for all of our projects. All of our projects in Texas are required by the Texas Pay Statute, by law, to be reviewed by an independent third-party reviewer. That requirement is not optional. And it's going to have two parts. There's going to be a before component, so before the project component, where that third-party reviewer will review the savings calculations and they'll perform a site visit. And it will also have an after component, so after completion component, where the independent third party will go back out to the site and verify that the improvements have been installed and are operating it as intended. And we're going to go through those parts in detail. If we go back to our process flow diagram, at this point in the process, the energy analysis has been complete, and now the ITPR, or the independent reviewer, is going to review that analysis. This is the so-called before review. This is the analysis prior to project construction, and it really has four components. The first is a signed project verification certificate. The second piece is the ITPR is going to initial our savings summary worksheet. They're also going to attach a cover letter, and finally there is possibly going to be a report that details any of their findings or their analysis that went into their review. The first thing on our list is the so-called project verification certificate. And this is a form that you can find on our website or in our program handbook. And on this form, the ITPR is going to certify a number of things, which we're going to go through now. The first thing they're going to certify is that they meet the ITPR qualifications. I've listed the qualifications here. The most important one is that the reviewer has to be a professional engineer, a PE, in Texas. They need to have relevant energy or water experience. And they need to have one of a number of credentials which we've outlined here on this page. The next statement will be a conflict of interest provision. You can see the statement word for word right here, but really the idea is that the ITPR is certifying that they are truly independent, and that there is an arm's length relationship between the reviewer and the party that actually conducted the energy analysis. This is necessary because we want our review to truly be independent, and so we are asking our reviewers to make sure that the only role they held for any of our projects is that of independent reviewer. The next part of our form is a review of the savings analysis and the project useful life. The ITPR is going to certify that they performed a site visit and that they reviewed the baseline analysis and the projected case analysis as submitted by the contractor. And based on that review, they're going to conclude two things. First, that the reductions in utility use are, quote, realistic and reasonable. Now, they're not guaranteeing the savings from the project. There should be no liability on the ITPR in terms of project performance. They're merely stating that based on the project as it was presented and the assumptions that went into that the reductions really are reasonable and likely to occur. And the second thing they're going to certify is that the period of the assessment does not exceed the useful life of the project. Again, this is something that is required by the Texas state law. The last thing we're going to ask our ITPRs to certify is that the project is a qualified project, and that's all caps, qualified project, under the PACE Act. And in order to be a qualified project under the PACE Act, it has to meet two criteria. First of all, it has to be a permanent improvement fixed to real property, which really just means that the project is difficult to remove and is intended to remain with the property if the property is sold. And the second one is that the project has to be intended to decrease water or energy consumption or demand, and could also be a product, device, or interacting group of products or devices on the customer side of the meter that uses energy technology to generate electricity, provide thermal energy, or regulate temperature. So we are asking our ITPRs to certify to both of those statements. And what happens is that once that's done, the project is deemed a qualified project, and this cements its status under the PACE statute. And consequently, this is really what gives our capital providers certainty that the project is indeed qualified under the PACE statute and is a legitimate PACE project. Going back to our process diagram, the savings review has been complete and the financing will proceed to close. Once that has happened, typically the project construction will begin. Now we know construction timelines can vary for projects of this nature. For smaller ones, the construction might take a matter of weeks. For larger projects, it could be months or even longer. And then after construction is complete, there's that final component of independent third-party review, which we'll discuss now. This step in the process we call the project installation verification. At this point, the project has been constructed and it has been completed. And our third-party reviewer is again going to be engaged, and they have another form to sign, which you can also find on our website or in our program guide. And this one's a little bit simpler. They're going to sign that form, the statement of compliance, and possibly attach a cover letter or report detailing any additional findings they might have. The form that the reviewer signs at this point in the process, termed the Statement of Compliance, looks very similar to the form they signed beforehand. There's going to be a number of statements that they have to certify to. The first one is that they meet the ITPR qualifications, that they are qualified to be a reviewer in Texas. Number two, they're going to certify that they do not have a conflict of interest, that there is an arm's length relationship between themselves and the contractor. Three, they're going to confirm that they performed a site visit. And finally, they will verify that the improvements from the project have been completed and are operating as intended. At this point in the process, the project has been constructed. The last part of the independent review has taken place. And so from an administrative standpoint, the project is now complete. There are a number of issues that come up pretty often, and I want to spend some time now addressing those in the form of a frequently asked questions section. The first question we get asked a lot is long-term M&V required, M&V being measurement and verification. And the answer to that is no, M&V is not required, although it is recommended. Now we know that in order to maintain the performance from efficiency projects, you really need to operate and maintain the equipment as it was intended. And with PACE, that is an issue that is best left between the property owner and the contractor. It is something that an owner can choose to opt into, but they do not have to. The next question I hear a lot is who chooses that ITPR, the independent third-party reviewer? And the answer there is that that person is chosen by the property owner and the capital provider and TPA. The important principle to keep in mind here is that because there needs to be an arm's length relationship between the contractor and the ITPR cannot be contracted with the contractor. It really is someone that will be independent of the person that prepared the energy analysis. The next question I hear a lot is what can I include in the PACE assessment? And so I've listed a number of things that can go into the PACE financing. Generally, the principle is that PACE is intended to cover 100% of the cost of the project, both hard cost and soft cost. So not just labor and material. Now, the things on this list, not all projects will have all of these costs, but if those costs are associated with any particular project, largely they can be included in the financing, as PACE really is designed to cover all of the cost of the project.
I get asked a lot about new construction. Is new construction allowed? And for commercial PACE in Texas, the answer to that is no. In Texas, PACE is really available only for retrofit projects, so existing buildings. And I've quoted the exact language from the statute. So facilities for undeveloped lots are prohibited. And at this point, we're interpreting that fairly strictly, meaning that that includes no new buildings on, adjacent to existing buildings or expansions of existing buildings. It really has to be a retrofit of an existing building.
Some best practices for our ITPRs. One, I would suggest that very early in the process you make your expectations clear in terms of what you expect to see from contractors. Make sure that you are not doing their work for them. You also need to be very clear if you need anything revised or any assumptions updated. And ultimately, if you have any questions on how something should be done, please reach out to TPA and ask us for clarification. Some best practices from the contractor perspective. First of all, gather your baseline data and your equipment data very early. Make sure that your calculations are open book and that you have shown your work. Be very clear with your assumptions and label those assumptions so that the third-party reviewer knows how you produced your end results. I would encourage you to engage very early with the third-party reviewer and with TPA as often as you need help. And finally, don't just assume things. Feel free to ask and reach out to TPA. We're happy to give you guidance in how to do your analysis, and so we encourage you to do so. For any procedural questions, ultimately, if you have a question who has the final say on how something should be done, that decision will be left to Texas Pace Authority. So again, engage with us early and often. On a similar question, where do you go for guidance? Also, that's going to be the Texas Pace Authority. Feel free to reach out to us directly. We have an email address which I posted right there. You can also reach us by phone or directly as individual staff members. We're happy to help you in any way we can and to make the process easier for you. At this point, we have concluded the formal part of our webinar, and I'd like to open the floor up to any questions that you may have.
So at this point, I want to take questions that have been submitted. So if you've got any questions, feel free to submit those now, and I'm going to, we'll kind of take them as I see them. So first question comes in, please define single versus multi-measure. A single measure, when I say a measure, this is basically the piece of equipment, right? So is it so solar by itself? If you're doing a solar system, that would be a single measure. A multi-measure would be solar plus HVAC plus LED, right? So each individual technology type is kind of defined as a single measure. Let's see, next question. Can PACE be used for new construction? I did answer that, so just to be clear, Texas PACE cannot be used for new construction. One question I've gotten is, how do longer payback energy savings items like windows with a 40-year payback work with the PACE model? This is a very good question. And the answer is that a longer payback item, if it has a 40-year payback, is going to have a significant challenge meeting that SIR test of 1 or greater. So for a project like that, there's really two things you could do. The first thing that we would encourage you to do is to take those longer payback items and consider additional items as well that have shorter paybacks. So instead of just a window project, combining that with windows plus LED lighting plus the control system so that you get a blended project with a shorter payback that can meet that SIR criteria. So that's one option. The other option would be that you use PACE to pay for a portion of the project, that portion of the project that meets the SIR criteria. So instead of financing the entire cost, only up to the parts where the energy savings justify it. How have submissions to improve the building envelope been taken so far? Substantial energy savings can be realized just by fixing current issues in regard to air, water infiltration, and insulation upgrades. Certainly, we would encourage folks to consider holistic retrofits, not just whatever their individual pain point is at the moment. the building envelope, we have seen, and do have a number of projects in the pipeline that are considering that, and that's definitely something that we would encourage any owner to consider as well. One of the things that we can do is help an owner realize what other options are out there in terms of, well, hey, you could just do this one-off measure, but there's maybe some other stuff that you could do as well that would make economic sense under the PACE program. The next question, how old must the building or adjacent structure be before a PACE project can be added? So that kind of goes back to this new construction idea, and we define a building as existing once it has a certificate of occupancy. So the building must have a CO. Effectively, what this means is that, you would never do an efficiency project on a brand new building, right? You would have built that into the construction. So really, PACE is in most cases going to be applicable to buildings that are, at least 5 years old, 10 years old, and kind of buildings in at least that age range. Let's see. The last question I've got so far, project size, how big is too big and how small is too small? And really, there's a couple of ways to determine this. In terms of too big, kind of the upper limit is going to be limited by two things. First of all, the value of the underlying property itself. You're really limited to about 20% of the value of the property in terms of project size. And you're also limited in terms of how much energy savings can you achieve, because we are looking to get that SIR of 1 or greater. In terms of project size, how small, this is a different story, and really it just comes down to economics. So there's no legal minimum. You theoretically could do very small projects, but there really is a practical lower limit in that smaller projects, the fixed costs that have to do with the financing of the project take up a larger percentage. And so at some point, smaller projects become uneconomic. And what that limit is, we've seen projects in other states, even down to the $60,000 and $50,000 range, but it really is going to be determined by the individual property and project's economics. Next question, can payoff of the loan be accelerated without penalty? And so this means, I think what you're asking is, can the owner pay the PACE assessment off early? And the answer is that in most cases, yes, because PACE in Texas is financed by one of many different private capital providers. Those are terms that can actually be negotiated directly with whichever capital provider the owner chooses to work with. So that's really, the terms around that really are up to the owner and the capital provider to decide. If the property is sold before the 20-year limit, what happens with the note? So to be clear, it's not actually a note, this is an assessment. And so because it's an assessment, PACE assessment is designed to remain with the property. So in the case of a sale, the PACE assessment will remain with the property, and the new owner will pick up the improved asset plus the assessment payments, just like any other special assessment. All right, with that, I think that is all the questions that we have time for. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Again, I appreciate everyone joining today. Feel free to follow up with any other additional questions. I'm happy to answer them. And if you have a live project that's going on, I'm happy to be as involved as you would like us to be. I'd be happy to help you out in the energy analysis. I think that you'll find that most contractors are actually already doing the types of analysis that we expect to see. So while it might sound daunting at first, I think that you'll find that you're actually already doing the type of stuff that we want to see. And I'm happy to talk you through exactly how that works with any specific project. So again, thank you for joining, and everyone have a great rest of the day and rest of the week.